Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 14.23 jungle tier list. So for content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of buffs and nerfs this patch. Most notable ones are Teemo being nerfed, and we saw a Master Yi, Rammus buff, and a Rengar buff. There are some other nerfs in amongst there, but let's get into the video. The D tier is going to consist of the same champions. We have Maokai, we have Rengar, and we have Silas. Maokai obviously got buffed in 14.22. He has once again returned to being a really unpopular jungler. This is his weakest role as it currently stands. Top and support both outperform it, and top looks to be in a pretty good spot. Like, if you enjoy Maokai, I'd recommend playing him there. In the jungle, he mostly functions as a low econ tank, primarily just a competitive pick. You just won't really get good results out of this champion in solo queue. In Rengar's case, he got buffed this patch. I know a lot of people really heavily overreacted to the buffs, thinking that this would make the champion broken. Obviously it didn't. The changes actually are relatively minimal. Like, Rengar R is the main thing from Rengar R isn't so much of a damage, albeit it's still a very nice thing to gain, and the lethality does help quite a bit. You mostly want it to obviously gap close onto enemy marksman and then output the rest of your combo, which is where more of his damage lies. You've got access to a bit more damage. Does this suddenly change his kill thresholds by such an egregious amount that this does do a huge amount? Not really. It's nice. It does enable him to snowball a bit more aggressively. Does it suddenly make Rengar good for the average player? No, not by any means. He's still one of the hardest junglers to play in the game. In fact, so much so that even with the buffs patch, his win rate went down by 1%. Kind of shows just how elite and one trick skewed this, mechanically dependent this champion is. Silas's case, he's been underperforming the jungle for a while. He isn't really supported that well in this role, and that does mean that if he gets changed for other reasons, obviously his mid lane strength in the previous patch, then he does tend to become a bit weaker in the jungle. Overall, his clear is a bit weaker. He relies a bit too heavily on snowballing. The changes he received back along, which encouraged more bruiser bruisery kind of items for Silas, your rocket belts and kind of your health to AP hybrids, your cosmics as well. Just didn't really help him for jungle. In fact, it made him worse because he wants to snowball and he's lost more damage in gaining more tankiness. Overall, he does remain in the D tier. Moving on to the C tier, then we're going to have the addition of Nasus. He is popular enough that I should include him. I know he does have a player base which kind of support him. Do I think he's bad in the jungle? I wouldn't say he's good, but I wouldn't say he's terrible either. Nasus is a fine jungler. If you enjoy playing Nasus, you can make this pick work. I don't think he is one of the worst champions you can play in the role. Obviously he's going to be off meta, and it's a lot of it's just going to come down to people not understanding how he functions as a jungler. He does stack considerably more aggressively here. It kind of circumvents his weak laning phase and enables him to be a really good mid game, mid to late. You can even function with him late game because obviously you're going to be stacking a lot more, but mainly as a mid game fighter, you are very, very strong and you can output a lot of damage. There's definitely value to him in this role. I don't think it's as good as top lane. You're still going to be more impactful as top lane Nasus, as obviously jungle Nasus is the weakness of not having great gank setup, requiring to be quite selfish with his resources, pretty invade prone. There are weaknesses to this pick which kind of prohibit it from the higher tiers, but if you like Nasus, then jungle's a perfectly fine place to play him. Gragas, on the other hand, is definitely on the decline. I considered putting this champion down to a D tier this patch. He really struggles at the moment with some of his itemization being nerfed, him being quite heavily nerfed in terms of his more aggressive snowbally builds. Hybrid Gragas, tank bruiser Gragas in the top lane still functions quite well. In the jungle, you do have to just go glass cannon so you can maintain your clear speed and then utilize the snowball effectiveness of that build. I'd recommend going Lich Bane into Storm Surge. It's been more performant for a while over just Storm Surge Rush, but overall he's still relatively weak and definitely in a pick I would not recommend. Kind of akin to the likes of Eve at the moment, who is also very much struggling in the jungle. As I've mentioned 100 times at this point, she got quite aggressively nerfed, then her itemization got nerfed and she just hasn't really found her footing since. In Kindred's case, she's pretty elite prone. Obviously in elite she does quite aggressively scale up compared to some of the other champions. Do I think she's amazing at the moment? Not really. She's also kind of suffered from her itemization being a bit weaker. she can still definitely find results though. Like if you give Kindred a good amount of gold, get you like your early full marks, then she can definitely be a really effective marksman within the game. But you do have to play really well on Kindred to get good results. Otherwise, she just becomes kind of lackluster, and you're gonna more consistently find results on other champions. Like I'd recommend picking Graves over Kindred at the moment, for example, if you're looking for like a ranged AD jungler. Nidalee remains in the C tier, also very elite skewed, very dependent on snowballing. Pantheon is more of a niche pick. He can function within the jungle, like his clear speed isn't bad, but he also, once again require, like a lot of the champions on the C tier and D tier, requires very aggressively snowballing to function and like maintain speed with some of the other jungle options, which aren't as dependent on snowballing, but do obviously require gold to scale the pet's damage and their own damage. In Pantheon's case, obviously, the point and click CC can make him really valuable, but he does fall off incredibly aggressively within the game, which is where like one of his main weaknesses lie, and makes him better as more like a mid to high elo pick. Obviously, mid and low, you're just going to struggle a bit more to get those kind of early advantages before you're kind of outscaled by the pace of the game. Hecarim, I know a lot of people think Hecarim is kind of rated a bit low. I have him as like a high C, as I think this champion has a lot of variance, and some games you can really comfortably run over people and like snowball the pace of the game. Other games you're just going to be really, you're just going to be dependent on your R, basically, find engages and try and be useful. If you're not ahead of the curve and you're not utilizing this pick's kind of tempo across the map, then he really does quite aggressively fall down the tier list, which is why I just can't really move him up to B tier at the moment. If he did get buffed or anything, then I do imagine I could move him up, and I know some build variations which Hecarim can kind of lean towards, and it could probably elevate him back up towards the higher tiers, but for the moment I'm going to leave him in the C tier. Zed is the worst Talon. Like if you want to play an AD assassin from the mid lane to the jungle, you should play a Talon over Zed, albeit Zed has an incredibly aggressive clear speed. Like if you're very comfortable in Zed, this champion can still net you results within the jungle. I'm just not going to really recommend them over Talon, who I think is a really good jungler at the moment in his current state. Talia has seen better days. She got unfortunately nerfed again when she probably shouldn't have been, but this was like 5-6 patches ago at this point, where she lost like 5% jungle monster damage on Q, I believe, and that did hurt her clear speed, hurts her ability to find her footing within the game. She can still be quite valuable in certain team comps, but it's just not really a pick I'd recommend for average elos at the moment. She can be a bit reliant on snowballing, akin to obviously a lot of the other champions, and she requires quite a heavy amount of game knowledge and just macro to make sure you're utilizing the ultimate effectively, combined with like your roam timers and like gank setup for the most part. Sejuani is obviously the or kind of akin to Maokai, the stereotypical low econ tank jungler, where she has loads of CC and she can be really valuable in that aspect, but also comes at the detriment of just not having great solo agency. Is a bit dependent on other players to really like get you those results, and if you're not and that ruins her consistency, so you become dependent on your laners to really kind of get you those results. Not a pick I'd really recommend at the moment, albeit she can still be valuable to a lot of drafts. So if you see an angle where you think Sejuani can be kind of game warping and you're picking late, then that can be an option. But oftentimes jungle, you're like rotating your pick 1, 2, 3, and she's just not going to have as much value unless you're like playing with a duo, for example. Moving on to the B, actually, one more pick in the C tier. I'm going to have Ambessa in the C tier. Long term, this champion, I believe, is broken both top and mid. Currently, in the jungle, she seems to be slightly underpowered. I don't know if they're willing to support jungle Ambessa long term. It'd be interesting to see with, like, the map changes coming next split and, like, how she lands for, like, competitive, for example. If she doesn't become a competitive problem, but Ambessa jungle will probably end up getting supported and they'll be like happy to greenlight it. At the moment though, slightly under, I would say. If you put the time in though, you can definitely find results on her. She will probably like even out at like maybe a B tier pick. Sits as a high C tier pick at the moment, but there is definitely a lot of skill to playing this champion. Obviously she has like a Kalista like passive, which takes a lot of a lot of games to really get the feel for it, making sure you're utilizing it effectively. And where you need to use it, and sometimes where you don't need to use it, obviously build variations come into play quite aggressively here. Like you have your Eclipses, your Voltaic Cycler Swords, your Shojans, all that can really change how well she does as well. So make sure you're doing your research, feeling being comfortable with English failed it completely again. Make sure you're like playing what you're comfortable on, and you're utilizing the builds effectively, and yeah, you should find results on this champion. Moving on to the B tier event, we have Zyra. So Zyra is doing okay, well, this is one of my like things which I actually don't understand at the moment, is where did Zyra's play rate suddenly come back from? Because this champion on 16th of November to the 21st of November shot up in play rate by like 3 times. I haven't seen anyone mention Zyra, by the way, so I am completely in the dark about why she's suddenly seeing this. So if you actually know why Zyra jungle has like is suddenly seeing like triple the play rate, I really do want to know, because it's actually like kind of fascinating how this champion, which kind of was just dying down and not really being played that much anymore, has suddenly just shot back up to like prominence. Anyway, Zyra, gonna sit within the B tier. She's a bit better than Brand at the moment, who I am actually also gonna drop down to the C tier. Brand has obviously been nerfed quite aggressively for jungle at this point, combined with his items being nerfed, and then continuous nerfs to his laning power. It's just all kind of dragged him down, and he's unpopular now, and not as good. So yeah, he's definitely struggling. Well, he just dropped onto the C tier. But yeah, Zyra, probably what I'd just say a bit better than Brand in her current state. If you're looking for like an AP jungler with like a lot of damage over time, then yeah, Zyra is the recommended go-to over Brand. I would say there's still like higher ones, like your Morganas, for example, I'd have slightly above Zyra, probably in the same tier though. Like I think I'll talk about Morgana in a second, but yeah, Zyra gonna be within my B tier though at the moment. But if you know, comment down below. I do actually want to know why she's suddenly shot up in play rate. Rammus is going to sit towards the higher end of the B tier. He's so close to the A tier, but the buffs just weren't really enough. I think Rammus needs a bit more to really kind of find his footing again. He should be good in the current meta. That's the worst thing. Like, Rammus should really benefit from like the meta being dominated by primarily AD junglers, like your Graves. I mean, popularity wise, like yeah, your Graves, your Lee Sins, your Viegos, Warwick, Nocturne, Vi, Yi, Kane, Karzik. Like, Rammus should beat all of these champions because he is an anti-AD pick. And he's still just not doing great. He's above average for like these champions, but then struggles into the AP matchup still. So I just can't really promote Rammus as a pick at the moment. But if you see the angle into like multiple AD picks, then he can definitely be a good option for you, especially with the buffs. He's doing a bit better, but I think he needs slightly more at the moment. Vi is going to be within my B tier. She got buffed in 14.21. She's doing a bit better, so I'm going to have her in the B tier at the moment. Obviously, it helped for more bruiser orientated builds where you're gaining more health, and like obviously feeds into the passive shield, which went up by 2% max health. Still going to be primarily kind of elite competitive skewed, where you're playing around with ultimate and her point and click capabilities, but she's more functional as like an average solo queue pick at the moment. Udyr has definitely fallen down. He was, I mean, for the longest amount of time he was one of the best junglers in the game. They quite aggressively nerfed him more recently, like his clear speed and his RR damage, combined with I believe some damage loss on his just standard R, and that did hurt him quite a bit. Like, he has dropped down to the B tier now. He's no longer one of the best picks in the jungle. He is someone who I'd recommend if you're comfortable on. If you're not, then you don't really need to learn him at the moment. Gwen, Karthus, some of the high, I mean, and honestly, like Udyr, are some of the highest mastery skill cap junglers in the game. Like, if you put a lot of time into these champions, like nail their clears, making sure you're maximizing the amount of gold you're gathering, they can be really, really impressive and really good picks. For the average player, though, just not things I'm really going to recommend. Like, if you're very comfortable on them and you like find the correct games to play them, then they can be really like extremely valuable to have within your arsenal of champions. But as more generalistic picks, just not really recommendable at the moment. Lee Sin, going to be my B tier, still the most popular jungler in the game. Still kind of sits below the bar, I'd say, at the moment, but still has a really high mastery curve. So if you put a lot of time into him, he can really aggressively climb up the tier list and compete with some of the best picks within the game. Rek'Sai is incredibly unpopular. The changes seem to have she got changed, and she obviously gained some popularity for a while, where they went back to the AoE knockup, and they changed her passive, and they made her more bruisery, and they just did a bunch of things to try and make her more popular, and she's just kind of fallen back to where she was before. I think Rek'Sai as a champion is probably healthy when she's slightly above the 50% mark. At the moment, she sits slightly below. She's not popular, and people will see that and go, well, I don't see any point to learning Rek'Sai, which honestly, I mean, fair enough. I don't think you need to learn Rek'Sai at the moment. I still think this champion has some really good gank angles, and if you play a lot of Rek'Sai, you can be really creative with how you play the game, and she definitely has more skill expression, but she's still underperforming at the moment, just a B tier pick. Bel'Veth, incredibly elite skewed as a champion, which is unfortunate, as I say all the time, where I think this champion should have been a pick which everyone could have access to, as she is the infinitely scaling passive, and she's supposed to be this I don't know how to describe it, but she's supposed to be this infinitely scaling champion with really cool attack speed things, and she just ends up being an elite skewed mid to early game kind of one item spiker, and it kind of doesn't feel correct for the champion, which I know seems kind of bizarre at this point, because obviously she's very much fallen into this pattern, and people are comfortable with where she is at the moment. But when on release, I know a lot of people wanted to play her, and she just isn't really that approachable in her current state. Echo, I say Echo kind of akin to Diana. Do I still have them both together? No, I don't. I have Diana a tier above Echo. I think Echo's slightly weaker, and I agree with that. This champion has definitely fallen a bit more compared to where Dino has, where she got that updated attack speed, so she was better on items like Nash's. Echo didn't really receive it. I mean, Echo hasn't really been changed in a long time. Echo stayed relatively I don't want to say balanced. I guess just unchanged. I think he received an ingoing or an outgoing Q buff at one point, and that did help with his mid lane, and obviously it helps with his jungle clear speed. But this hasn't really changed that much, and he's kind of fallen a bit over time. Skarner is going to sit towards the lower end of the B tier. He's becoming more like Sejuani, where he's more of an elite skewed CC bot. They're taking away a lot of his damage, which I don't know if that's the correct direction for the champion, but obviously that's kind of one of the only ways they can go after him. Otherwise, they'll go after his durability, and then that makes him more of a bruiser rather than a tank, and I believe they want to keep him as a tank for the most part. So he is in this bit of a weird spot, but I think he is definitely over time going towards that low econ tank trajectory, where this champion, is just going to end up becoming quite elite and competitively jailed. Shaco is still really popular, honestly. Kind of surprising. This champion is mostly played by one tricks, and they actually do just keep his player base up. He is quite hard to play. He has two playstyles, obviously the AP and the AD variant. The AD variant requires very aggressive early snowballing, utilizing the effectiveness of lethality and Hail of Blades. The AP scales really aggressively, gives them really good control over objectives, and can output a huge amount of DPS. It does tend to be a little, neither of his builds, I would say, are reliable. They are very volatile in the way I want to play. If you give AP Shaco a lot of kills early, it can feel quite oppressive to play against. Same goes for AD though. AD with kills will very much one-shot you at times, and that can feel quite frustrating. Do I think he's in the best spot at the moment? No, I'd still say he's slightly under the bar, but if you put a lot of time into him, as a lot of people have with Shaco, then he does net you results, but there are weaknesses to both of his builds, which can be quite clearly exploited. Master Yi, I'm going to leave within the B tier. He's kind of akin to Ramos, going to sit at the top of the B tier. I think the buffs to his R were nice. He really did benefit from those, and that does allow him to more consistently snowball, but they were pretty late game skewed, which has kind of lent towards the trend of Yi once again becoming quite aggressively level reliant, and less, he's still very gold reliant, so you do want to get those kills early, but he will continue to be more low elo skewed as they continue to kind of push him more towards these levels, requiring XP to really get access to more of his power. Poppy going to remain in the B tier, great counter pick. Obviously, the W can be really valuable into the likes of Lee Sin, and she can function into Graves in some of the other AD matchups. She has good armor items accessible to her, like Unending Despair. So they really, I mean, is one of the best, if not just outright the best tank item in the game. And if she wants to use that, she can. But obviously, things like Iceborne, things like Sundered Sky, there are like loads of different options for her. Even like the Barmy's options within the jungle, there are just like variations of ways of playing her. She's in an okay spot. Obviously support Poppy is still like one of the strongest supports in the game, which is where like I would recommend playing her if you do enjoy her. But Poppy jungle is a great flex option, especially if you're very comfortable on the pick. Lilia, Morgana. Well, I mean, in Lydia's case, she's kind of fallen out of the meta. Obviously, she's been consistently nerfed for a while now. And it looked for a while like they just weren't really going to go after her that heavily and just like tap her down consistently with every time she kind of rose back up. But she got pretty heavily hit last time and she does drop down to the B tier. Morgana's in the B tier. Not so much because of her like damage and her clear speed, like she has really good access to both of them. It's more her inconsistency. Like Morgana is very reliant on setup, so she can like utilize her Q and armor effectively and maintain full duration of W to output the most amount of damage and then cycle that cooldown, because obviously every time you get a tick with W, it refunds a level of the cooldown. So yeah, Morgana's inconsistency problem. Lilia becomes a bit more conditional. You kind of just want to play her into tankier matchups, and that is where you're going to get more value out of the pick. Jax is also a good counter pick. Great into auto attack specific matchups. Comes in as like a flex option. You want to play him into something like Xin Zhao, you perform quite well there. No, wouldn't really recommend blinding him. He's not a blindable jungler by any means, and he will clear a bit slower than some of the other options, but he's perfectly fine here. Like, if you enjoy Jack's jungle, you can definitely find results on it. And Ivan, unique clear, unique play style. He tends to be a bit more reliant on the agency of like other players and people performing, so he can utilize the full extent of his kit, whether that's like the W on hit damage, the E shielding, and then like obviously his healing and supportive outputs. Daisy can be quite oppressive, can be quite is a really valuable summon, and that can definitely like really shift the power on Ivan. Is he a pick I'd recommend like going to pretty early on? Probably not, but if you enjoy the more supportive outputs of champions, combined with understand that you're going to have a bit less agency, and you learn his clear, learn how to utilize his summon effectively, he can be quite a valuable pick to have. Moving down from the A tier, then we have Kha'Zix, who got quite heavily hit this patch. Losing 4 armor early really hurts in the current meta, where most of the current game, where most of the popular junglers are AD junglers, so he loses quite a substantial amount of durability, makes him more prone to just being killed within these fights, and yeah, it does hurt him quite a bit. That combined with the W slow, losing 50% of the slow on Evolve W hurts that Evolve order as well. Like, a lot of people have kind of defaulted on W Evolve first, which was obviously a very valuable tool. It allows him to catch people, it allows him to set up kills for other people as well, which can be all very valuable things. And losing some of that effectiveness does hurt him quite a bit, and he does drop down to the B tier now from being like a high A tier option. Zac drops onto the B tier as well. Zac got indirectly nerfed in jungle this patch from like what was supposed to be primarily a top lane nerf in losing 1% max HP damage on the Q. Yeah, it hit jungle, it hurts his clear speed, it hurts his scaling, so he does lose some power here. And he was a low A tier option in the last patch. I'm gonna have him as a high B tier option in this patch. Like, I would say like Zac, Kha'Zix, Rammus could all be considered A tier champions like in good spots, but are just slightly under the bar now to where I kind of would want them. Well, I mean, from where I'd have them as like my A tier options. Shyvana leads the A tier. She got nerfed this patch. She's still a good low elo pick, but she's really lost her viability in high elo. She already was beginning to kind of tread that way, but they've hit her gold scaling again more than anything, which is obviously going to be more elite skewed, where you're farming more effectively, usually more effectively utilizing your gold. That does hurt her, and yeah, she drops down to the low end of the A tier for average play. In elite, she's basically not really going to be played anymore, so she'll probably drop all the way down to like the C tier there. Mundo has been really gaining in prominence within the jungle more recently. He's just allows him to circumvent obviously one of the weakest points of his game, kind of akin to like Nasus in that regard, where Mundo's early is going to be quite a big struggle of him. He's not going to clear that quickly early on, but as you get items, you scale very aggressively, and you can be a very, very unstoppable late game tank, especially into like specific team comps which just don't have good tank killing capabilities. He can be really valuable in those aspects, and if they do, then obviously targeting them out and then looking to kill them before like they can really like output the damage they want onto you can be a really effective way of just winning games on this champion. He does struggle, obviously not having hard CC and being a bit weaker early are his clear weaknesses, but he is still definitely on the rise as a really solid jungler at the moment. Briar is very, very low elo skewed, but the buffs she received more recently did help her kind of like maintain her spot within the A tier. She relies on people just not understanding how to play against her kit primarily to really find results within the jungle. Elise, very, very powerful elite pick at the moment. They're still doing fine for the average player though. Like if you're comfortable on Elise, she can really comfortably net you results. The quality of life changes she received and then the buffs with those quality of life changes really did help her. She then nerfed, obviously, that does have an effect. They nerfed her armor, so she does become a bit more vulnerable to a lot of the AD pool. And that took her from like a high A to like a more low A option, but she's still very good in the current meta and can very much net you results. Trundle is fine. So Trundle is a really good low elo pick. He's one of the easiest champions to play in the game. He is a stat checking anti-AD option within the jungle. The jungle is primarily dominated by AD champions. He really benefits from that. Obviously, he's an AD still on his Q. He can also drain tanks with his ultimate, which can also be really powerful and quite potent into his matchups. Sucks into AP champions. Don't play him into AP champions. He comes in more as a counter pick, but his ease of play combined with the jungle meta at the moment just gives him enough to kind of like support him as like an A tier option. That combined with lethal tempo being buffed and his W being a great steroid for that keystone can make him really valuable. Diana is doing a bit better than Echo. Like I'd say Diana is just the next thing up from Echo, where they're both really snowball orientated AP junglers with really aggressive steroids within their kit, so that when you get a lot of AP, they can clear really aggressively, do objectives really easily. And that can be really like powerful thing to have within your kit. Obviously, what they're lacking is like good tools from when behind. Like if you're behind on these champions, they tend to be considerably less useful than some of the other options. But if you're snowballing on Diana, this champion can be really oppressive. In Diana's case, she does fall off a bit more. Like her ultimate doesn't scale quite as well as some of the other options, unless you're really ahead of the curve. And her kit is more orientated around like being a really good mid-game kind of like AP assassin skirmisher. Fiddlesticks is still a really good option. He did get nerfed more recently. They took away some of the damage off of his Q, but he still clears really well. He still has one of the most powerful ults within the game. His vision is also very, very potent, and that can give him a lot of strengths, but obviously Fiddle is going to be a champion primarily played by OTPs. And that does end up like resulting in some sort of like win rate, I guess I'd say win rate lag, where the champion's win rate doesn't quite correctly reflect the actual power level of Fiddle. And I'd still say his biggest weaknesses are if you fall behind, then he can struggle considerably more. And if you can't actively sit and drain a target without being killed by like a different member or enemy has like innate anti-heal, then that can definitely be a big struggle of the champion, which is kind of what prohibits him from being a higher option. Mordecai is just a great AP jungler. Teemo drops from the S plus to the A tier. Both these champions obviously top laners to junglers. Mordekai's case, he's incredibly powerful into like tankier matchups, into some of the bruisery matchups, and just like less mobile champions where you can really consistently land your full combo and be like a really good stat stick option into them. He does clear relatively well. He is good at objective taking, and his ultimate is very potent in objective taking. So there's definitely strengths to this champion within the jungle. In Teemo's case, he just clears a bit slower, and that does hurt him considerably more, as that was one of the biggest strengths of him, was just how aggressively he cleared because of how aggressively they had over-steroided his E. It's now 100, well, it went from 150% damage to monsters to 125%, so yeah, there's a big loss there. He's going to be less consistently out on the map, it's going to slow down his ability to scale, and that does hurt him quite a bit, so he does drop all the way down to the A tier. Nunu is still a good, good snowball option. He has the two unique builds, the tank variant, the AP variant. They can both be really good situationally. He is very dependent on getting kills if you're going the AP variant, so you can consistently burst targets down and utilize that. On the tank variant, he really spikes quite aggressively on like your 1-2 items, being as like this more mid-game orientated tank where you can comfortably control like the gang. Your ganks are really potent like that, and then converting that into leads so you can be really oppressive on objectives where you have really good smiting tools in the Q smite combo, which can be very hard to ever really contest. It just gives them a lot of power within those mid game scenarios, and oftentimes if you're able to utilize that kind of potency with the objectives and making sure you're just securing what you can across the map, then it can translate into late game value. It can maintain his spot as being like a really valuable tank option or AP option if that is the way you do want to go. Volibear, I still really like as a champion. He did receive the E nerf from 14 seconds down, from 12 seconds to up to 14 seconds, which did hurt him. It hurts his clear speed, hurts his ability to consistently fight. Obviously, the Volibear build at the moment is the Roa variation. It doesn't look like the other ones are doing as well, especially with the Sundered Sky nerfs in 14.19 or 80, whenever they did the new split changes. It did hurt that build variation, so he is looking at the Roa variation as being like the best option at the moment. However, you can still dabble around with some of the other choices, things like Cosmic Drive, and like obviously Sundered Sky is still a viable option. We've seen like Ice Spawns, we've seen like Deadman variations. It really comes down to what you need within the game. Volibear, still a great jungler, relatively easy to play, great dive potential, great early game skirmishing. He's quite potent within all those regards. Wukong has quite heavily gained popularity within the jungle. The W buffs he received not too long ago really did help him quite a bit here. He does spike very aggressively on 2 items. That Trinity Force and Sky spike is very, very powerful. It's one of the most aggressive spikes within the game, as it really enables him to be very oppressive on objectives and mid-game fights. Obviously, his early jungling and not having access to hard CC pre-6 is definitely going to hurt him. But on level 6, you can gank quite consistently. You can skirmish, team fight, and that can really be where your champion really feels like it comes online. Into AD matchups, he does obviously gain the value of the passive, which can be really powerful, and it can allow him to like spike a bit earlier. Into AP matchups, he's going to definitely struggle a lot more, and oftentimes they will more consistently kite him or space him, as like a lot of the AP matchups tend to be ranged with CC options, and that is where I'd say some of his bigger weaknesses lie. Actually, Kayn, I believe Blue and Red Kayn are both really viable at the moment. Blue Kayn obviously going to be a bit more elite skewed, relies more heavily on snowballing and getting like either early hubris stacks or playing like different variations like your Voltaic Cycloswords, your Yomu's variants. There are different ways of playing Blue Kayn, and it's doing quite well in elite, but can still translate well in low elo, especially if you're comfortable on him. More consistently though, you're going to go red with like your Eclipses, your Cleavers, your Shojins. There's different variations you can play red. Even Cyclosword red can work, so that can definitely be something you opt into. Overall, Kayn just in a really good spot at the moment, a great A tier option. Amumu, very easy to play, a great AP tank option. Like I'd say Amumu is probably the AP tank you should look at playing first, as he's just very easy to access, very easy to play, great CC, great damage, very healthy clear as well, with the W and the E being quite valuable within that space. He did receive nerfs towards his flat values, which did hurt him more for his for higher elos. Like if you want to try and translate this champion into into a Diamond Masters higher than that, then he's definitely going to struggle a bit more. But below, like Emerald below, he's still a very, very powerful champion and can still definitely be considered an S tier. But because I kind of encapsulate some level of Diamond, he just sits on the edge of the on the higher end of the A tier. Talon, I still think, is a great champion. Especially with some of the buffs he more recently received. They keep trying to buff his mid to make it become a bit, or just try and enable it to be a bit better, with some of the assassins just underperforming in the mid lane at the moment. But it has really helped jungle Talon, and he is in a really good spot in his current state. He's very good for snowballing. Oftentimes, I mean, his clear is doing a bit better. His invades are very strong. There's just a lot of potency to this pick, and if you're very comfortable on Talon, he is in a very good spot for the jungle. Tends to be a bit more elite skewed. Like in elite, I genuinely think Talon is like an S tier pick. For average helos, I'd say he's more like a high A tier option. Yeah, probably sits as more like a high A tier option in his current state. Viego is also going to sit within my A tier. He's very close to the S tier. Like I have him as like a pick which I want to move up, but it just doesn't feel quite like he can contest with some of the S tier options at the moment. Obviously, he's very popular. He's very aggressively snowball orientated, where if you get one takedown within a fight, you can be really, really powerful and output a huge amount of damage. His skirmishing's really good. Obviously, he builds and plays like a skirmisher more than like an assassin or a bruiser. But the Kraken variant, the Trinity variant, there's different options of what you can really go on this pick. Even like Titanic Hydra, for example, is a good Viego option. And yeah, it really comes down to how comfortable are you on the pick, how consistent are you able to get that first takedown, is it right within the like situation of the game, and he can be really valuable if like he really aligns with what you want to achieve. The S tier then consists of the same 5 champions. Graves got a bit weaker this patch, so he's probably the lowest of the S tier options. The Collector nerfs and the Yomu nerfs did hurt him a bit. Obviously, the Collector one was kind of placebo, but it is still a nerf. Yomu's does more heavily hit him. It's going to hurt his mobility around the map. They didn't nerf the stats of the item. They just nerfed the active and the passive movement speed for range, so he does become a bit weaker in that aspect. Xin Zhao and Jarvan are still the go-to like AD cookie cutter junglers, I guess you could say, where Jarvan very much just plays around his EQ as like a CC gank combo, and then once you have access to the ultimate, he just chains them all together as a decent amount of burst, and obviously primarily more for the CC and the value of like helping out your teammates. The flag obviously giving attack speed does also help within that space. He doesn't clear that well, he doesn't scale amazingly, but he's still very, very good in just the simplicity of his playstyle and what the win con is supposed to be. Kind of akin to Xin Zhao, more built around his skirmishing capabilities. Like Xin Zhao does have a bit more 1v1 potential and can be quite aggressive, and like in those mid-game situations, especially if paired alongside Enchanter. He does fall off, though. Obviously, if you're not getting your items, you're going to struggle consistently more than those late-game scenarios. His ultimate is a great tool, though. Can give him a lot more durability, so it allows him to have like a fallback pattern of like a tank almost. But yeah, he can still be very potent in the current meta. He is deemed very boring to play, though, which is why his pick rate doesn't usually sit as high as some of the other options. Nocturne, very powerful ultimate, great 1v1 potential as well, especially if you're playing around your Q and you're able to consistently get value out of your W spell shield, so you get that attack speed steroid. He can be really valuable. He does fall off quite aggressively, kind of akin to like your Jarvan, your Xin Zhao, for example. But yeah, that level, I would say 6 to 13 mark is really, really impressive, and it can be a really potent like kind of window to play Nocturne, especially if you're sat on like a stride breaker, and even like a fallback pattern of like lethality Nocturne can function within specific games into like swishy compositions. And then Warwick is probably the best jungler on the patch. He kind of goes a bit under the radar at the moment, but the buffs he received in 14.22, well, I mean, there were more like quality of life changes, but ended up being more buffs and less quality of life. I know some people have some frustrations with him, but he's doing really well at the moment. Like the win rate, and just the itemization choices he has access to kind of says enough. But more generalistically, his 1v1 potential is incredible. His team fighting is a bit more lackluster, but it kind of makes up for in like some of the other aspects of him. His cleanse is pretty good. His objectives pretty good. He's pretty strong just across most of the game. His gank's also pretty nice with the ECC, the Q being able to chase down the target. It just gives him a lot of value at the moment. I would say there's like an S+ pick for jungle this patch, but Warwick is definitely the closest champion to it. And I do think he's really good at the moment. So if you really, but the current S tier does give you a lot of AD options. The AP pool is a bit more how would I say it? Like, it really comes down to what you're comfortable on. Like your Elises, your Teemos, your Dianas. They could all function really well, especially if you're comfortable on them. But like, yeah, the S tier picks are what I'd really recommend going to. And Mumu is still my recommended go-to tank within the jungle. But the things like Mundo are definitely doing it a bit better at the moment. So you could definitely pull out a Mundo if you do want like a tank option within the jungle. If you want access to a bit more utility and you're just not really concerned about your carrying potential, maybe you're just not comfortable having agency within the game, then yeah, Skarner, Sejuani can be options for you. Skarner tends to be a bit more elite skewed though, but yeah, like Rammus for example, is like a tank option, especially into like those AD compositions. And yeah, those are my thoughts. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you for the next one. Goodbye.